To the decision to privatise Channel 4, it sparked fierce debate. Some ministers have insisted the channel will thrive if it's set free from state ownership. Yet others worry about losing a semblance of public service broadcasting. So is it the right decision to sell? Well, joining me now is Tom Morton, a campaigner at the pro-nationalisation organisation We Own It. Welcome to the programme, Tom. First of all, why should the state own a broadcaster?
Yeah, so the reason why Channel 4 being owned publicly is an advantage versus being in private ownership is that as a publicly owned not-for-profit organisation, Channel 4 can do things that a private media channel is less likely to do. And that includes things like invest in its profits. Channel 4 is a really profitable enterprise, and it invests those profits in kind of more high-risk strategies, but that are really advantageous to the country. So, for example, Channel 4 spends about half of its revenue outside of London. And what that does is it creates jobs in places like Leeds, in Bristol, in Glasgow, supports about 140 small to medium businesses. And it doesn't cost the taxpayer a penny to do that because Channel 4 is funded by its advertising revenue. So privatisation, on the other hand, actually is going to create a financial burden for Channel 4 because rather than those profits that it makes being used to create jobs outside of London, those profits are just going to go into shareholders' pockets. So that's why it's important for Channel 4 to be a publicly owned TV channel, because a private owner isn't going to do stuff like that because all the money that it needs to make can be made in London. So there's no incentive for it to create jobs outside.
Well, a private owner could choose to do something like that. I mean, we are no longer in the world of just three companies broadcasting on television. Thankfully, we're in a marvellously pluralistic world where there are hundreds of different channels doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things in all parts of our United Kingdom. Isn't it a bit of an anachronistic idea that something that was founded 40 years ago must always stay in that state in which it was founded, ignoring the modern reality of how media is developing through streaming and everything else? In some ways...
Yeah, so this is the government's argument, but I think it doesn't hold much weight, to be honest, that Channel 4 is somehow not going to be able to compete with streamers going forward. But Channel 4 is reporting a £74 million profit. It's got £200 million in reserve. It contributes about £1 billion to the economy. That's not something that, you know, all these smaller media companies that you're talking about does. And the main point here is that it's already the biggest free-to-air digital platform in this country. So there's already millions of people, in particular younger audiences, who are using Channel 4 for streaming. So this argument that, Channel 4 can't compete with online streamers doesn't really hold weight. It's already a digital platform. It's already used for streaming. So, it's not the case that it's kind of an anachronistic thing from the past.
Why would it change if it wasn't run... if it wasn't owned by the state? There have been some reports in recent years that actually the fact that it's owned by the state has had this Tory government change who sits on the board or block a board appointment or whatever. Doesn't that seem deeply inappropriate for a media company? Isn't it safer? Potentially, from your perspective, it might well be able to be more renegade. It might well be able to go off in a more MSNBC direction, if we want to use a US example. It might be more set free editorially were it to move into being a competitive company in a market.
Well, it might do, but it also might not do that, and it might do exactly the opposite. If it's in private hands, then the public has got absolutely no say about what happens to it. It's just wealthy shareholders who get to decide what happens with it. But I think we need to talk about what the risk is here of privatisation. You know, some of these reports are suggesting that privatisation will risk about a 35% drop in regional jobs. Channel 4 creates 10,000 jobs in this country. And I'm not just talking about wealthy entertainers' jobs. I'm talking about, you're on a TV set now. You understand that there are electricians, there are people who work in offices, there are like set painters and scaffolders who rely on this organisation for their work. And because it's a not-for-profit organisation, the profits that it does make, it can invest in creating those jobs outside of London and supporting small and medium businesses outside of London. Because it's in public ownership, we have some, the government is in some way accountable to the public for the decisions that it makes about Channel 4. In private hands, there's absolutely no accountability to what happens with Channel 4. So, yeah, I don't see the argument that if it's in private hands that it can suddenly, it may well change. It could change in absolutely any way, but it wouldn't necessarily change for the better. And in fact, the reports are suggesting that this is really going to risk people's jobs outside of London.
Do you think it is the case that private companies do also invest in their staff and indeed in infrastructure? But I suppose this is a conversation that will run and run. For now, Tom Morton, thanks so much for joining us to talk it through.